I just want to show you that up to give a bit of context so it doesn't seem like I'm referring to something else. I think there's been a little bit of some confusion in the community that this doesn't work anymore or requires specifically like it only runs on a PlayStation 5, or I think there's been just a bunch of misconceptions. That's not true. It works perfectly fine in the latest build. It runs great. This is on my PC. Obviously, I'm an editor right now. So I made this slide deck. Some of these slides were off of this demo, the Lumen in the land of Nanite, and I'll be showing a bit more of this going forward as another example of content, just like the Valley of the Ancients demo is. This is also a good example, but in a different form. Showing it in motion. You guys have seen this demo before. I won't go through all of it again. This is it running in the editor, by the way. That's obvious. I'll full screen it here. So what I was talking about before with that sort of detailed shadows, they get very, very sharp and detailed, which is great to be able to show off that sort of intricate geometry. Because without that, you won't. It's harder to tell the difference between geometry and normal maps when there isn't self-shadowing involved. But when we have that real geometry and we can cast shadows from it, you can really see the definition in a geometric form when you could see all those little details casting shadows themselves. So anyways, let's.
Awesome.
There was some misconceptions that we put this like crack in here to like hide streaming. I have the whole level loaded in memory right now. It was actually so that we could just show the camera getting like really close to this rock. It's just an excuse to put the animation there. It wasn't really to hide any sort of streaming things. So
on that note too, like this is before we had implemented any type of world partition or anything like that as well.
This is all with the previous like sub-level streaming. This isn't using world partition because this came before that tech was ready. Anyways, fly up here, you can see a bit of that difference of the sharp versus soft shadows. Go into the view modes here to look at. So let me turn off the anti-aliasing so it stops shaking. So this is a view of the individual triangles. The video compression is probably going to suffer a bit here just because of how noisy it is.
If you turn off anti-aliasing, some of that jitter goes away. It doesn't help a ton, but it might help.
Yeah, I just did. So if I get in really close here, you can see here are the size of the actual triangles. So we're not drawing points, we're not drawing voxels, we are drawing the actual triangles. And when you get close to it, these triangles are the ones that were imported. It's not like Nanite resamples your data into some other form. It's just once you start getting further away, you might be able to tell that it's changing what triangles it's drawing. But what's easier to see is if we switch over to the cluster view. So like how I was describing that there's this hierarchy of clusters, these are those clusters. And as we get closer, it swaps those clusters out for different ones. And what's important to realize out of it, and the reason why this works at all, is we're trying to keep, essentially, I mean, it's the math that it's doing is a bit more complex than that, but from a basic understanding, we're trying to keep the size of the clusters about the same size on screen, because each cluster is the same number of triangles. There are 128 triangles per cluster. And if the size of clusters ends up staying roughly the same size at all these different view distances, then that means that the number of triangles that we're drawing on screen is about the same at all these different distances. And I can show that exactly with.
Brian, just real quick, checking in here. Did you have a hard out today, or can we continue for a bit?
I don't.
Okay, great. Because the amount of questions we've received and the amount of questions we have from the previous stream are starting to add up. So I just wanted to make sure that we get a chance to cover some of them.
All right, I'll try to
This is all
accelerate.
great. We don't want to stop you.
Okay,
No,
I'll try to
please
speed
continue.
up.
No.
No, all
It's
good.
all good. Just making sure you don't have to ditch real soon.
Alright,
And Galen,
so,
I assume you're good as well.
Yeah, I'm good.
Perfect.
So-
Awesome. Please continue.
So I'll turn that visualization off so you could actually see the text on the side of the screen. You can bring this up yourself with typing nanite stats into the console. This shows what nanite is actually drawing. There's two passes because it uses a form of two-pass occlusion culling. But the key thing to look at here is the number of triangles down here at the bottom that it draws after these two passes. So the number of clusters, which should be obvious, and then number of total triangles. So even though the number of triangles in the source geometry for this might actually be over a billion of what it would be for all the meshes that are visible, the number that nanite actually draws, rasterizes to the screen, is much lower than that. It's still fairly high. It's in the tens of millions. In this case, it's 12 million for this view. But as you change for different views, we can see this in numerous different scenes. So if I go back to the last one, see here, it's about 16 for all these different views. It ends up being fairly similar. Like no matter what geometry is in view, it doesn't really get much more than 20 million triangles, and that is kind of demonstrating this concept of it scaling with screen resolution. So no matter what sort of content is thrown at it, it's similar in its cost, and that cost is mostly in the way of number of triangles. So before I move on, we can take a look at. I've just made a test here to show off the shadows. So I've got a point light there with a source.
Mike wasn't in the demo.
No, I mean this hallway was. This is the area that the beetles they were walking around here. It has been running for like hours in the background, so the beetles all walked away, I guess. Anyways, so I just put this bicycle in to get a really thin object so you could see the shadows well. So these are like physically based shadows with proper penumbras. So they're really sharp right at the caster, and then as they get further away, they get blurrier, which is exactly what you want for area light shadows. And when seen in an actual setup, it's less obvious to see that effect, but it's happening everywhere. That sort of sharpness near his fingers, and it gets quite blurry as it goes further out, which really gives a lot of a really nice look to shadow casting. Come out to this next scene, and we've talked about it before. This statue, and every one of the statues, they're all the same statue, was like 33 million triangles, I think. How the original source geometry, and it's insanely detailed. But in this scene, I think there's close to like 500 of them, making it such that there is like very clearly billions of triangles of source geometry on the screen. But you can see again over in the corner that we're drawing about 22 million triangles in the end. So if I show the triangle view, will be really hard to see with the video compression. But if you look at the clusters, again, it has that same sort of attribute where as you get closer, the clusters stay similar sized on screen at all these different views, and it just draws more or less triangles as you get closer. So still, even though this scene is far more complex, it's still running at similar performance to the hallway that we were in before, even though there's hundreds of these many million statues in the scene, as well as, I mean, it's important to note, all of it is kind of insanely complex. The art in this is just incredible. So I put a couple of things in this scene that weren't there previously, just to show something and kind of dispel another myth that I think is out there. Where did I put them? Here we go. So I've got that bicycle again. I wanted to highlight, although we've shown off a lot that Nanite is great for rendering these really high poly mega scans for photogrammetry sort of content, for very organic stuff, whether it be scanned or ZBrush sculpted, those sorts of things. Nanite also supports hard surface modeled meshes as well. This was actually a key reason why we didn't pursue some of the other possible approaches that wouldn't have been a great fit for hard surface. So if we look here, like there's still let me actually reduce the FOV so we can see, we can look at some of this stuff closer. So if we look at these gears, they're actual, geometric gearing, and we look at the chain, they're individual links in the chain, and they're all modeled out. So we look at the polys in this case, it's not uniform. There are big triangles that end up going across those slowly changing surfaces, and then there are cases that have really tiny triangles when stuff gets really dense. Another example of this is this bust from Chain, a character in Paragon. So this is the high poly mesh that was used to bake the normal maps for this character in Paragon. This bust is 3.5 million triangles. It was sub-D modeled for all of the sort of mechanical bits, and the organic parts, his skin was ZBrush sculpted, and Nanite does a really good job of that as well. And this is also a great case to show off just like how sharp these shadows can get.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
So, and then one last fun bit before we move on to some questions. Fly out here to show this Vista. I don't want anybody to get the impression that I skipped something on purpose because it doesn't work. No, like this Vista still works, and it's also worth noting like all of the stuff here in this Vista is all detailed out to the same sort of insane geometric detail as like all of it. Every bit of this. It's all built in the same way as everything else. So last little bit here at the end that I didn't even realize until preparing this last night for this stream. If you come all the way down here to the end where Echo walks through this portal at the end, the ring on the portal is not a mesh itself. It's actually made up of these instances that were placed on the wall of that previous area. All of these around. So if you go to the instance view, they're all individual instances duped around in a ring.
Kit Basher stream.
Yeah. So it's worth mentioning that that's another, like, we talk a lot about the triangle count of how Nanite can enable these like really high poly meshes, but that like both of these demos really kind of really demonstrate the power of huge amounts of objects in the scene and what you can get out of that, and the power of being able to kit bash those huge number of meshes, and like what that enables. So
yeah, and then taking that same, kind of like super dense, high poly, or high resolution meshes everything, building on an entire level like this and then using some of the open world features that we have in Valley of the Ancient, I mean, you could kind of just keep this going and keep this growing as it streams things in and out. So you're trying to stay inside memory and whatnot without, having to sacrifice the amount of instances you have in your game or your experience, right?
Yep. So in this demo, all of the nanite data on disk in its compressed form comes out to 16.14 gigabytes. So it's a decent chunk of size, but it's not ridiculously huge. I think there's some misconceptions that there was like hundreds of gigs of nanite data, and that's just not the case. In this demo, the texture data was far larger than any of the geometry data. I think that was probably true for the Land of the Ancients demo as well. I'm not sure the exact numbers there, but I think the numbers for the nanite data were fairly similar in size, maybe even smaller than this.
Yeah, I think we were smaller as far as the geo goes, but we were a bit larger in the textures just because we had so many different assets